All right. Hello,
So,
everyone, and welcome to another physician father interview. I am Dr. Stephen Freiberg, aka the Dad Anesthesiologist, and today I'm really excited to interview Dr. Steve Beaudry. Dr. Beaudry is the Vice Chair of Anesthesia at Johns Hopkins Bayview Hospital, one of the affiliated hospitals and a very busy obstetric hospital, which he's still the medical director of obstetric anesthesia there. And he's always been very involved in education with the residents, and he's always a favorite amongst the residents there. And so I'm very excited to chat with him today about his family and his medical background.
thanks for having me, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me to do this. It's an honor, so I'm looking forward to it.
Well, excellent. Well, the honor is certainly all mine, and I think my children are injuring themselves in the
Oh
background. So
yeah, mine are downstairs, so they're going to be
okay,
up
good.
any moment.
It is the dad anesthesiologist after all. So if you hear some crying in the background, apologies to any of our,
Yes.
my three listeners.
Yeah.
But anyhow, tell us, Dr. Beaudry, how it was that you sort of chose medicine, your medical training path, how you end up in anesthesia, your subspecializations in anesthesia, and what your
Sure.
practice looks like today.
Sure. So I'd say my path into medicine was fairly typical as far as biology undergrad. I took a year off just to work and really to make money because I didn't have any money. So I applied to medical school, and then I pretty much ran out of money, so I couldn't apply to any more schools. So I pretty much limited it to just a handful. I got into West Virginia at the osteopathic school, and so I attended the following year. My med school was I did it in 6 years because I did 2 years of the NIH research fellowship in between my third and fourth year of medical school. So that was an opportunity to do a little more hands-on basic science work outside of med school. So didn't quite have all the same pressures of trying to do this while being a medical student and things. So it was a great 2 years. I learned a lot. I got to meet Nobel Prize winners at NIH and from around the world. So it was a wonderful experience from a professional standpoint. And I also happened to meet my wife because we worked in the same lab together. So that really worked out those 2 years.
Absolutely.
And then I ended up, so I finished there, graduated, and then went on to internal medicine internship and then anesthesia residency at Hopkins. And that was a phenomenal program. It's probably the best 3 years of my training ever. And I still look back on it with fond memories, even though it was residency and very busy. I'm sure you probably had a similar experience. And I know, as one of your faculty members, it was a pleasure to have very bright, sharp people come through. And that's one of the best things about Hopkins. So I did 3 years there. And then I went on to do a obstetric anesthesia fellowship at Cornell in New York City. That was a ACGME approved program for 1 year. And then after that, I started back on faculty at Hopkins. And so I joined the anesthesia faculty there after, I think it was about 2 years or so. I decided that I wanted to do additional training because everybody at Hopkins has, that kind of streak within them, multiple fellowships and things.
Right.
So I ended up doing the regional fellowship on a hybrid faculty basis. So I was still faculty, but ended up doing a lot of my time in regional, and I fulfilled the requirements for that. So I'm technically in both divisions now, the obstetric anesthesia and the regional division. So clinically, my practice is pretty varied.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So how was it, though, that you chose to go into medicine and then further that you chose anesthesia and then to do additional training in obstetric anesthesia,
Sure.
and then even a little bit more that you touched on kind of the Hopkins rat race to keep training? But tell us about your previous places.
Sure. So I started off, I was always a science guy, mostly biology, like sort of the, biochemistry, more of the, human anatomy, those types of things. So pretty much knew early on I was going to be a biology major, but within that I wasn't sure. And I tried out environmental science and wasn't really my thing. And then, I took a couple of, I took human anatomy, and then actually, I think the course that really sparked my interest was biochemistry in college, because there was a strong focus on enzyme deficiencies, and it was really cool to see how simple, single base pair mutations and things can alter structure and function of a protein, which would go on to have some, on maybe more about some terrible, outcome,
Sure.
which makes just a huge impact on someone's life,
Of course.
and their morbidity, mortality, and things. So I just thought that role, that interaction between basic science and human experience was really fascinating to me. And so I decided I wanted to go on. No one in my family is in medicine. We're mostly teachers and just pretty blue collar type people. And so it was a bit of a shock to my family I was going to do medicine, and probably even to myself. But I had to spend the last part of my college work really trying to beef up my grades and things to make it to be competitive as an applicant. And so then also taking that subsequent year off to really make sure I had everything buttoned up and could take the MCAT with enough time and stuff to do well. So that's kind of how I got into that. But even within that, again, having no medical experience, very limited clinical shadowing experience, and certainly nobody in my family in medicine, I really had no idea what I was getting myself into, I'll be honest. I don't come from a long line of, surgeons or anything. So I was really just sort of hoping that it worked out, because it was something, it's such a big investment, obviously, right? And
Sure.
time and finances that, at least nowadays, you really have to hope that it does work out and that you can, really find something within that field that you like to do. Because it's a lot to get into and then realize, oh, maybe this isn't for me. But I knew very early on from the first week of med school that I made the right choice. It was a great school. We had some innovative programs for students. So I did a problem-based learning curriculum, which really meant I didn't have to be in a classroom all day, and I could pretty much study outside of the traditional lecture style didactic program. So I could really kind of focus on what I wanted to while still meeting the criteria, meeting the requirements for passing the preclinical curriculum. And I just sort of took off in that. I kind of geeked out a little bit again into like some of the more basic science things, and that's where I sort of got my interest to do the basic science research fellowship. And so at that point, I was actually between second and third year, I had applied for the NIH program. And this was through Howard Hughes, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which is based in Chevy Chase, Maryland. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but it's a large medical philanthropic organization. They fund a lot of undergraduate education, a lot of PhD level basic science programs throughout the country in all areas, not just medicine, but a lot of basic science. So the intent of the program was to really take medical students and just give them an immersive year of basic science research in a laboratory at NIH. And so you really could almost basically just walk into any lab that would take you, because you were funded and they didn't have to worry about paying you. And you got a great project. They got a free lab worker for the year. So it really worked out great. Made a lot of nice connections, and again, talking and meeting with just some of the most brilliant people in the world with regard to basic science and discoveries. So that's where I spent the next 2 years. So I actually applied 1 year, didn't get in, and I was very frustrated because I really thought I had. I was a little confident, maybe a little too overconfident. I really thought I had a good application, but I didn't get it. And then I went on to do my third year clerkships, and I said, what, I'm still going to apply to this because it sounds like such a great program. I think it would really make a difference for my career. So I applied again, and I actually interviewed, and I got in that time. And so I was just beyond thrilled. And it was great because I get to, move into, you live on the NIH campus in Bethesda, and you live in like a little dormitory with the other 30 plus students. And it was a great year. So I joined my lab. I actually did malaria research for the year. I had gotten into that, or I chose that because I had always sort of been interested in infectious disease, and I'd done a little traveling in college with regard to trying to do some tropical medicine type experiences. So I did a little bit of that. I thought maybe internal medicine would be my chosen career path. Maybe ICU, maybe infectious disease. I didn't really know, but I knew I liked that the intensity or the pun, forgive the pun, but really the intensity of intensive care, ICU medicine. We have really sick people. And again, the thing that attracted me is sort of that interplay between basic science and physiology and anatomy, where one small antigen on an infectious disease, infectious organism, can just cause a whole host of tissue injury and inflammation, sepsis, things like that. I just thought that was so fascinating, those mechanisms.
And global economic downfall, as we've seen.
Yes, as we've experienced and are still experiencing, right? So it's so relevant to today.
Sure.
And clearly it's not going away anytime soon. So we have to keep these programs going.
Sure.
But that's sort of what attracted me to the lab that I chose. I had a chance in that lab to travel to West Africa. So that was just a phenomenal experience. And then again, so my wife happened to be MD, PhD at a different med school. She was in her PhD years. She had done the first 2 years of MD and was now in her PhD phase. And I actually met her early on when she was just interviewing for the labs. And then she went back and finished. And I had no idea. It was literally like just a 10-minute introduction. The PI had introduced us. And then she went back and did her third year of med school, or whichever year it was. Then she came back. I'm sorry, that was second year. And then she came back full time a year later to work in the lab. And we just kind of struck up a conversation. She was familiar with, my undergrad institution, and we just had a lot of connection. And, we ended up dating and engaged, and we got married my intern year of residency. So that worked out awesome. So after doing all that research, it was fascinating. Then getting back into sort of the clinical side, then sort of, people have to figure out, obviously, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? You don't have a whole lot of time, as you know, to sort of figure that out. And I was still in that sort of that ICU mentality. How do we manage people with really bad, distorted physiology, and how does it affect, morbidity and other things. So I thought maybe internal medicine, but I actually did some anesthesia at the end of my third year. So it was actually before I went and did my research year.
Sure.
I loved being in the operating room. I had done surgery. It was interesting, but I was not interested in anatomy in any way, or how cool this anastomosis was going to be. It had no, it did not stick with me. But when he was barking at the anesthesiologist to change the blood pressure, I was like, how are you doing that? And why is that relevant to what we're doing down here? So I was
actually,
right. Right. At the time, I was like, oh, he can just dial a number. That's amazing. How do you do that? Turns out you can't. But I thought that was really cool. And then, spending time doing that again as a fourth year student, I was like, well, I could actually go into ICU through anesthesia, or I could just stick to the operating room. I like the hands-on aspect of anesthesia. I think, when people ask this, sometimes, students who come through, or other people, or family members, and like, what is it that attracted you to anesthesia? And I think it's that for just a very brief time, it's a very intense one-on-one relationship with somebody, and you are the advocate for that person for the entire time, from the moment they walk into the operating room to when they leave, and sometimes even after.
Sure.
And so you're inducing a state in which they are helpless, and you're now the defender of them for the next 2 hours, whatever it happens to be, or longer in a cardiac case. And I just really like that. I like that idea that I'm advocating for the patient. I'm doing what I know is for them every moment of that case, and that hopefully it's sort of like the idea of like a ninja, like you sort of go in, do what you have to do, and then you slip out without being known. You should leave no trace of what was done, right? So once the anesthetic wears off, there should be as minimal impact as possible, and hopefully they come out better, right, with maybe a better experience than what they've had last time, or like, I woke up so nauseous and I had so much pain, it was terrible, and maybe there are things I can now do to try to affect that, and maybe using some evidence-based techniques to improve their outcome. And when it does, it's amazing.
Sure.
And now I do a lot of labor and delivery as well, which certainly has its own host of instantaneous gratification and rewards. Most of the time, it's a very wonderful place to work. Most of the time, there are great outcomes, and people are very happy for the most part. Sometimes they're not, and that can also weigh on you. But for the most part, it's always risk benefit, or do the pros outweigh the cons? And for me, anesthesia always has done that.
Well, how did you make the jump then from anesthesia, with previously a big focus on critical care, and certainly that's a route you could have taken, to going to obstetric anesthesia?
Yeah. So looking back at that decision, again, we have to make it relatively quickly, right? As you start to go through training and try a little bit of this, a little bit of that, depending on what you're scheduled for. So I'd done some ICU. I had done mostly, general OR and ICU early on in my first year. And I definitely enjoyed ICU. I enjoyed, again, the intensity of that interaction where someone can just be so sick and you're throwing everything you can at them, trying to get something to work. It was, I would say, mostly it's a bit draining. Cardiac and ICU obviously go, very hand in hand. So I don't have to tell you that, but I think I liked the idea of having a little more immediate effect.
Sure.
Or providing some sort of more, something that could happen a little bit faster. For example, labor epidural or a regional block or something. So, and you certainly do procedures in ICU, but I preferred the other ones. So, so I said, what is it that I want to do when I walk into the hospital every day? Like, I think that's a great question for people to ask themselves as they're debating their different fellowship options or job options. Because this comes up a lot. People are always asking, should I do a fellowship? Should I do this one, that one? Should I work? And I just say, when you get up in the morning and you drive to work, what is it that you want to walk into when you get there? Do you want to go to the ORs? You got 2-3 ORs to manage? Do you want to go to the ICU? Do you want to be the block person, just kind of float around and stick needles in people all day long? What is it you physically want to do? And I don't know. Hopefully that provides some guidance for people, but that's really what helped me. So I said, when I walk onto the labor unit, it fills me with joy to be there, and the range of complexity, the range of procedures is enough to keep me fulfilled. That I'm always finding interest being on labor and delivery. And so even though there is some of that in the ICU, I get more from that from labor and delivery. So, because it is a good mix. You're doing hands-on procedures, you're doing very routine type things, you're doing very immediate stat things where mom or baby are at risk already. And so that level of intensity fluctuates, and I really enjoyed that. And again, because the outcomes mostly are good, it's usually an enjoyable place to work.
Absolutely. So that's your medical journey, and you told us a little bit that you met your wife during research, and luckily that all worked out. And now you have a couple kids running around. Is that correct?
We have 4.
Okay.
Yep. And number 5 due in about a month. So.
Oh my goodness! Congratulations.
Yeah. Yes. So.
Tell me about your kids.
So so far we have 3 boys and a girl, and we have a girl on the way. So there'll be a little more balance there.
Good.
So our oldest is 9. Our youngest is 2. He just turned 2 this summer. So we have a 4th grader, a 2nd grader, a preschooler, and a toddler. So we're busy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, I always tend to touch on this with my guests. I mean, anytime, obviously being a physician and being a father, there's a lot of competing responsibilities. You have a large family with which you're a father of. How do you manage it all? How do you make it all work?
I'm not sure that we do. No, no, that's a great question. Well, I'd say I think you have to define what works. What
Sure.
does it mean to work? For me, everyone's healthy, everyone's safe. They're not tearing their hair out, and they're not going crazy and jumping off the wall. So I'll take that as a win. My wife is also a physician, so she is in her fellowship training in pediatrics. So she's quite busy.
Sure.
But I think we've gotten used to, if not maybe addicted to busyness.
Okay.
Because honestly, I think if things slowed down, I don't know what we do. Of course, there will be a time when it does, and we'll have to adjust. But we had our oldest when I was a CA1,
Mhm.
and so he was born that summer. So very soon after starting residency, I was on leave, for just it was like 3 days. It was it was really no time. So so we just got used to the busyness being very early on. Um, she was in her PhD at that point, and so she, her hours were a bit more flexible than mine as a
Sure.
resident, so she could do a little more of her writing and things for her thesis from home. I mean, she still had lab work to do.
Sure.
She was also traveling back and forth to Oxford for some lab work and things. So, we just, I don't know. I think you have to be very flexible,
Mhm.
and I think you have to be willing to give up certain things, right? You have to, um, I don't have many hobbies to speak of anymore, but that's fine. Because raising kids is my hobby, right? I mean, it
Right.
takes time, and you have to invest time in it, and you have to, if you want to see the reward or the return on your investment, it takes time and practice and study. I don't have any answers. I don't, we're doing the techniques that we believe in, the things that we have come to see work, but other people have different methods, and that's fine. I think for us, our keys are having our kids want to be is where we go to church on Sundays. We have a strong connection with our community group. They really keep us grounded, our pastor especially. So we want our kids to be faithful when they grow up, to know that we're faithful Christians as well, and hopefully they can see that. Hopefully we model that example as best as we can. um, we want them to be good citizens, treat each other well, be fair and kind to each other. And then, I think ultimately, whatever it is that they want to do, that they do it for God's glory first, but also for their own fulfillment. Because I think, one of the questions that was coming up was sort of, if the kids ask about going into medicine, what would you tell them? And I would say, if you feel this is your path, this is what God's leading you to do, then great, go for it. But realize what it will cost you.
Sure.
And there's obviously, as you know, a huge sacrifice for certain things that you just don't have the flexibility. You give up the better part of your 20s and or 30s
Right.
to do this job. And if you're okay with that, and if you're okay with the time and the financial investment at the beginning, if it is what you're ultimately meant to do and what you want to do, then it will be great. And we have tried hard to not push them in any way.
Sure.
I mean, there are certainly days when I'm sort of like, you don't want to do this, right?
Right.
or they see it. I mean, kids are so perceptive, right? I mean, you can't lie to them. You can't, when you think you're hiding something, and they just totally, they can sniff it out. There's no question. And so they know when we're stressed. They know when I've had a rough call, or mommy's working on something, some kind of big deadline, or it's just we're in the middle of COVID. It's April or May of this year, and we're both just stuck at work because people are demanding answers, and we just don't have them.
Right.
And we're trying to keep ourselves safe. We're trying to keep everybody else safe while also doing a good job. That was probably the peak of anxiety for both of us in our lives. So I'm glad we're coming down from that a little bit, and things are getting a bit better. And I think we're taking a little bit of a breath now.
Yeah.
But the kids see it, and there's no way to really hide that. And I don't think you have to hide it from them. I think you just show them, daddy's really exhausted. I promise we will play a game, but daddy needs to nap right now.
Right.
And in fact, if you want to watch a movie while daddy naps, I'm okay with that. And TV can be a babysitter once in a while. It's not the end of the world.
Right.
We don't want them, in front of a screen all the time, but it's just what it is. Sometimes we need to do that to survive.
Sure. No, it makes sense. I mean, with the busy household you manage, what's your favorite part about being a dad?
My favorite part is when I come home and I get absolutely mauled at the door. It doesn't matter what time of day. It could be if I'm post call and I'm coming home in the morning, or just a regular day in the evening, 5:30. That's the best part.
Yeah.
And I've actually secretly recorded it on my phone a couple of times. So in the past, I've been like, I know they're going to attack me, and I'll just pull out my phone because I don't want to forget. I don't ever want to forget those moments.
Yeah.
Because I know in all the busyness, it's so easy to brush it off or to forget about those things. And those are the things that we're going to remember, or that we should remember,
Sure.
because that's all we're really going to have. I mean, the stress and all these things of the day to day, and the case that didn't go well, with the surgeon who got mad. At the moment you're just so fired up about it.
Yeah.
But we're going to forget those things, and it's those other moments that are really going to stick with us. So I don't want to forget those. I want to make sure every one of those is captured as much as possible.
Absolutely. And Dr. Wolpaw shared the same, and I certainly can relate now that, my daughter's been doing the song and dance a little bit when I come home, and now my son's just starting to. And as of recent, my daughter's biggest fascination is how many patients I had, which, she must have,
Sure.
She's young as it is, but she must have no clue what daddy does, because some days it's like, wow, it was a 12-hour pump case. I had one patient today.
Right.
Other days, I'm supervising 4 to 1 in endo, and I'm like, daddy had 36 COVID today. She's got to be like, what is, she's a liar. But
yeah.
They catch funny things.
Yeah, and our kids, I mean, everything is COVID right now, right? Because that's all that they know. So every time I come home, or when I go to work, they always want to be like, Daddy, wash your hands and wear your mask. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. But then when I come home, they're like, did anybody get sick today? Did they all have COVID? Fortunately, no. But yeah, they're just, you can't put anything past them.
No, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And, so especially in your area, doing largely obstetric anesthesia, we can talk, we'll jump into that now. What do you think is the change that sort of happened in obstetric, I guess specific to anesthesia care, but really just obstetric, inpatient obstetric care in the setting of COVID?
Yeah. Fortunately, anytime you can avoid instrumenting the airway, it's certainly a great thing.
Yeah.
So the fact that we rely so heavily on neuraxial anesthesia, I think it gives us a leg up.
Sure.
In that, in the last couple of decades, we've gotten much better at neuraxial anesthesia for obstetrics, and there's a lot of good evidence out there for our practices, and labor epidural infusions and CSE, and spinal anesthesia and spinal morphine for C-section. So we got a good foundation there. Beyond that, what do you consider aerosolizing, I guess, is another question. So a woman in active labor huffing and puffing through contractions is probably aerosolizing a lot of viral particles. So we've really had to, and it's unfortunate and it's frustrating sometimes when you have a patient come in and you sort of want to get right in there and start, but if you send off a COVID and you're waiting, hopefully it comes back quickly, but you're like, oh, should I go in now, provide some pain relief a little bit earlier, or do I wait and see how the result is? And not that you change your practice necessarily, but certainly PPE might change with that test. But certainly, our nurses, they certainly, they're phenomenal people at heart, and despite a very nasty infectious disease like this, they're still getting in there and they're still helping their patients get through labor, holding their hand, getting right in their face, when they're supporting them for an epidural, or just helping them breathe through contractions. And so they are without doubt incredible people and heroes for those patients. So our practices haven't really changed all that much, I would say. Certainly if you can minimize in and out, things like that, coming in and out of the patient room and just trying to do things from a distance you can. But sometimes you just got to get in there and, hopefully the epidural goes in well the first time and you don't have to go back and redo it. So things like dural puncture epidural, I'm a big fan of. I know it's a bit controversial, but I do love it because it does gives me a little extra confirmation that my epidural is likely in the right space and will work subsequently if we end up going to the OR, because I don't want to have to put her to sleep if I don't have to.
Sure.
We've got all of the standard obstetric risks and fetal risks, and now you throw on COVID and a potentially aerosolizing procedure. So if we can avoid those things, even better.
Wow.
And I don't know a ton about what the evidence has shown with regard to fetal outcomes. I don't think it's been all that terrible, but certainly if you can avoid, there's certainly been COVID found in placental samples and things. So there's certainly some impact there. But fortunately, I think the outcomes overall have been okay. But, for us, especially now, we're 4 weeks away from delivery. We're just trying to not get sick and we're very, very strict about masking and hand washing for us right now, because we're on the goal line. Just don't mess it up. Just got to get there and, have a baby.
And at the hospitals that you're primarily working at, is family or significant others allowed in the patient's room during labor or during delivery, or how's that?
Yeah, so that has changed. Yep. We've loosened up those restrictions now that we are testing moms universally pretty much as soon as they come and for any kind of evaluation.
Wow.
Regardless of gestational age. She comes in contracting or doing a labor check, they pretty much get the nasal swab right away. And fortunately, we're getting those back within an hour or two. I'd say 2 at the very most, but lately it's been an hour. So unless something is really super urgent, meaning you have to go to the OR real quick, we would end up going to a negative pressure room and donning full PPE. But those have come down with better testing. Or faster testing procedures. And the other thing that's sort of affected us again is sort of staffing and because as you know, you're pretty much committed when you're in those cases and you're not gonna be able to come in and out and we try to also spare the trainees from having to do that too, being the one person stuck in the room. So it does affect our staffing a bit. So we've had to sort of beef up staffing where possible to help manage when we have COVID patients.
Sure.
Yeah.
And, again, you have a pretty interesting perspective, having a foot both in the door of obstetric anesthesia and of parenthood. But yes. What would your advice be to women? It can be COVID related or not, but sort of your advice in terms of the one thing you want them to know about obstetric anesthesia overall.
Wow.
One thing.
How much time do we have in this?
Maybe here's one thing. If you had your take-home point for especially non-physician women or non-medical.
Sure.
Women.
Yeah. That's a great one. I think we as obstetric anesthesiologists, or even as general anesthesiologists, a lot of times people don't know really what labor analgesia, specifically epidural analgesia, is about. So there's a little bit of a mystery there, but I never try to convince anybody that it's the right thing. If someone wants to labor without it, I am one of their biggest advocates to labor naturally, and I think it's totally reasonable. At the same time, epidurals are incredibly safe, and there's great data that they are safe and that they have very good outcomes. And I think the minuscule risk that does exist, almost always, the benefit outweighs that. And so I would say, I don't want them to ever feel antagonistic, or that, if you choose to have a doula present, I think it's great. And if you have questions about epidural anesthesia or, options for cesarean section, just know that you and your baby are number one priority. So obviously we would never do anything that would compromise them. If I didn't think it was safe to do labor epidurals or spinal for C-section, then I wouldn't do it. And I always get back to, if this was my wife, if this was my relative, what would I recommend for them? And if they wanted to go with epidural options, then I'm all for it. So I was getting back to, how would I treat them as my own family member? And that's what I would say to them. But just know we're part of your team, and we can always be there to be a consultant if you have questions about things. But also just know that overall the data are very favorable, that these are very safe procedures.
And I think the advice you give is pretty strong for any facet of medicine, basically saying, what would you want for your own family member, or how would you do this for your own family member?
Yes.
A lot of times, patients will ask that question. I think it's an appropriate question to provide guidance because that's what they're looking for. And the other important point that I think you touched a little bit on is, about expectation setting. I think that can be so powerful in all aspects of medicine, but especially with anesthesia. As always we describe, you will feel, pressure, you may feel some sensation, it might improve your pain by this percentage. I've joked with colleagues that, sometimes I feel like we should shoot that percentage real low and just set
That's
the
right.
bar.
Set the bar.
What is it?
That's right.
Under promise and over deliver, but
Yes.
overall, I agree. It's obviously it's safe practice, and we're there to we're part of the team. So share. And again, having the unique perspective of a foot in each arena, what would the advice be that you would provide to, I think the preferred term now is father of the baby that is accompanying, or any, need not be biological father, whoever that main support system person is in the perioperative, peripartum period? What would your advice be to them?
Eat before your wife comes to the hospital.
Sure.
Because it's usually dad who passes out during an epidural. But also number two, the corollary to that is don't be insulted if you're asked to step out for the epidural, because it's not about you, it's about her. And so the experiences I have had, the very few where there have been issues, it's usually from dad, and it's usually no fault of his. He's been up all night, all day, trying to support his wife or spouse in some way and get her to the hospital, and he usually forgets to eat. He doesn't stay hydrated, and seeing a loved one in so much pain, and then it's not necessarily a blood squeamish thing, but sometimes just seeing that can just be too much, and that can tip them over. So again, if it distracts me from taking care of her and providing her the best care, then I want to eliminate that. So that's why I usually have family step out. I think most of my colleagues do that as well. And very, very few people have ever pushed back against that. And usually once I provide my rationale, I'm like, look, let me focus on her. I'm going to get her comfortable. Let me get this done. She'll be great. And then I'm going to come out and get you as soon as I'm done. Sure. And 99 times out of 100, they're like, that's great. That's fine. Let's do that. Because then he can go and get a cup of coffee, take a little break. So just understand it's nothing personal against you. I want to keep him safe, but also I want to focus on her and not just getting distracted from a fairly invasive procedure that, I don't want to make a mistake. So don't be insulted.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Steve, I don't want to keep you anymore, but thank you so much for chatting with us today. Want to wish you congratulations and best of luck for the new little girl you said who's on the way. And want to wish you and our listeners a happy Labor Day upcoming, and just everyone stay safe, stay healthy.
Bye-bye, listeners. Thanks for listening, and looking forward to coming back anytime.
Thanks so much.
Have a great holiday.
All right.